The Labour Party is making a dog's dinner with its response to Israel's alleged war crimes in Gaza, and now it seems many of its councillors have had enough. ITV's political correspondent Shahab Khan has posted this on social media. New. I'm told the Labour leadership arranged an urgent meeting with councillors last night about the party's messaging on Gaza amid fears of pending resignations. At the heated meeting, David Lammy and Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff Sue Gray were told they only have days to act. The meeting followed a Labour Party letter advising councillors not to attend pro-Palestine demonstrations, and councillors' fury is also a response to comments that Starmer and other senior Labour figures have made in the media over Gaza. And that includes comments like this.
A siege is appropriate, cutting off power, cutting off water.
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked.
Do you support the order to move them or not?
The order to move them? Well, clearly.
Just yes or no?
It's not a yes or no, Victoria.
Shihab Khan went on to report this about that meeting. Lammy and Gray spoke to council leaders who demanded Starmer rose back on previous interview comments about potential war crimes in Gaza and has a firmer stance on condemning war crimes. They also demanded that councillors should not be stopped from attending Palestine demonstrations. They were particularly aggrieved by the messages they were sent on the weekend, which I revealed earlier. The meeting doesn't seem to have made much of a difference to Labour's messaging, though. This morning, Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey has said this on Sky News.
Is there a humanitarian crisis in Gaza at the moment, yes or no?
There's certainly the risk of a looming humanitarian crisis. That's why we've been, alongside a range of other international voices and the UK government, urging Israel to make sure that basic supplies of water and electricity are restored, that humanitarian aid gets in, that civilians are protected, and that all leaders act in line with humanitarian law and do whatever is required and take every precaution they can to protect civilians.
Nearly 3,000 Palestinians have now died in Gaza, 11,000 are injured. There's diminishing little water, no food, no power. According to the UN, nearly 500,000 Palestinians have been forced to flee their homes while bombs rain down from above. Meanwhile, the Jerusalem patriarchs and heads of churches wrote a letter on the 13th of October labelling very clearly that what is happening in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis. But apparently, for John Healey, we aren't there yet. According to Shahab Khan, Labour is now facing a serious rebellion. One council leader, who says they may have more than a dozen councillors threatening to resign, demanded something is done to appease very unhappy councillors ASAP. One source described the entire meeting as a, quote, total mess, while another said they were shocked by how desperate some council leaders were. Quote, situation must be worse than we think. They're convinced they're losing local support. At least 4 Labour councillors, as well as Young Labour's BAME officer, have already resigned over the party's lack of condemnation for the assault on Gaza. And now today, a group of leading scholars on international law have written to the Labour leadership demanding they issue, quote, a public and detailed clarification of Labour's legal position on collective punishment and on the forcible transfer of civilians. Very, very serious stuff, both politically and legally. James, what I don't get here is that the Labour leadership could have condemned what happened the weekend before last. They could have offered an extended solidarity to British Jews, and they could have acknowledged that this is a humanitarian disaster and that we're seeing war crimes in Gaza. They could have proverbially had their cake and eaten it in terms of sort of political rhetoric and managing various different groups and their feelings. Why haven't they done that?
One probably shouldn't discount the initial profound horror on October the 7th. But even then, I think it was very clear how intense the calls to sort of retaliatory violence would be. And certainly, if you've been paying attention to Israeli politics, how volatile civil society would be in its wake. One of the things we didn't mention earlier was the great difficulty that Netanyahu is having with the emergent movement of families who have someone who's been taken hostage. But really the key to the Labour Party, I think, here is that there's minimal British political relevance internationally, and that means that the Labour Party handles these questions largely by turning inward and addressing itself. The Labour Party does that on a lot of things. And I think key is something that we didn't see in the clip, but is important, is Lamy's answer to this question. He made a statement, something like, "Oh, I want to be foreign secretary one day." And so part of this is, I think, him and the Labour Party more generally wanting to project that image of the sort of reliable junior partner for the Atlantic hegemony. So the United States is enthusiastic, perhaps excessively enthusiastic, younger partner. That's a very sort of post 9/11 feeling. And I think both you and I will remember, because we're a little bit older than some of our colleagues, exactly how awful it was to be coming to political consciousness in the wake of 9/11. So in that sense, it's positioning itself as unthreatening to the security establishment. There's also a touch here, of course, the David Lammy sort of Groucho Marx thing. These are my principles, and if you don't like them, I have others. Second here, though, and I think is equally important, is the domestic political dynamic. And this is effectively using this kind of horrifying situation, and it is an extraordinarily horrifying situation, to demonstrate that the party has changed post-Corbyn. Corbyn, of course, deeply, deeply associated with Palestinian solidarity, also, of course, with the looming spectre of the scandal over anti-Semitism. The party thinks that those people likeliest to be offended by its position on this stuff, the left, most parts of the Muslim community, Palestinians in Britain, have nowhere else to go. It's a very famous old Peter Mandelson phrase. Recent shifts, I think, therefore, you can see as a result of kind of party discontent, but perhaps also the belated realization of just how bad things are going to get in Gaza. But the really key thing here, I think, to take away is to really stress, war crimes, and war crimes are not justified because they're a war. That there's a war going on. We call them war crimes because they're tempting for belligerents in war. That's why we forbid them, because they often present themselves as tempting, if utterly brutal and utterly destructive, solutions to the strategic problems of war. And that is something that a younger Keir Starmer might have remembered.
I wonder as well, because like I said at the start of that question to you, James, there is a world where this isn't zero sum, right? You can respond in a very authentic, meaningful way to British Jews. You can condemn what happened the weekend before last in southern Israel. And you can call out war crimes and a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and tell Israel that you shouldn't be sending in a ground invasion. You can do all of those things. That's the principled position. And they haven't. And what I find really interesting, James, is that for whatever other weaknesses the likes of Keir Starmer or David Lammy have, they are aware of political optics, and they do care about what people think about them. And I don't mean the councillors. I don't mean people leaving or Muslim activists, getting in touch with Shahab Khan. But Keir Starmer presents himself as a liberal, humane, human rights lawyer, Mr. Darcy from Bridget Jones' Diary, and this is clearly very at odds with that. And I wonder, I'll put this question to you, I wonder if that's partly a result of the fact that the people around Starmer, the people at the top of the Labour Party, have a massive cognitive bias, frankly, a herd mentality, which basically means that anything Israel does, we have to support it. Anything involving the Palestinians has to be condemned or will be mealy-mouthed. And I think, frankly, that was their default. That's their set of reflexes. It leaves them very poorly equipped for a situation where we could see tens of thousands of deaths, where we're going to see, if there is a ground invasion, ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's already started. The point is, will the Israelis back it up? What do you make of that, this idea that at the top of the Labour Party, there are just so many people with all these presumptions and sort of ideological inclinations, which meant this was always inevitable?
I mean, I think that's right. One of the things that has happened since the 7th of October is that things have become unpredictable. And it's not just in Israel and Palestine that things have become unpredictable. There is a series of set responses in moments like this, which have been predictable for years. They're the responses that were trotted out in 2014. They're the responses that were trotted out in 2009. They're the responses that have been trotted out time and time and time again, really over the last 2 decades and a half. They no longer work. And the thing is that those responses are the ones that kicked into action at the top of the Labour Party. As you say, they're kind of political instincts, I think, for those people, and particularly those people who come from that that section of the Labour right. It's obvious that the situation has now changed in a way that means that those responses aren't adequate. And so I think, in a sense, what you're seeing is them scrambling for their to adjust to the new situation. And obviously, that's they're not handling it very well. I think they're realizing they're going to have to do better. They're realizing they're going to have to carry the can, they're going to look like fools if, as looks like it's happening, the US position changes. And as details continue to come out of Gaza. But yes, you're right about the political instinct. That's what's happening here.